What makes a great story? Something you hear and deeply connect with. Something you hear and immediately want to share with others. That's a question always at the front of my mind when I'm creating an episode or a season for the Midnight Library of Baseball. Tonight, I've taken your suggestions and put together some of the episodes that most resonated with you, the listener. I thought it would be fun to sit down with a friend and discuss these episodes in a way that adds to what has already been said. So if you've heard the episodes, you'll come away with something new. And I have to say, this has been an exercise in stretching my comfort zone because to contemplate sitting with someone and talking about my episodes I created and researched and produced, felt a bit indulgent at first. But guess what? This voice that said, "You're bragging, you're showboating," that's part of an old system that I no longer welcome. It was part of a system that held me back. And I know this system resonates with many of you. Feelings like you can't take pride and share in what you've done. You can't take up space, as if you're doing something wrong by saying, "I'm good. And I did this thing that I'm proud of and I want to share." I'm done with that. I did these episodes and I'm proud of all of them. And I'm proud of myself. And I'm excited to share my conversations about them with you. And I can't think of a better person to converse with than Matt Collins. I connected with Matt through Midnight Library of Baseball and through Matt's story of what baseball has meant to him. You might remember Matt for his story about Ernie Harwell, his broadcasting idol, who he was able to meet. Matt has his own podcast called the Pre-Made Podcast, where he talks with former classmates from college about life transitions and profound change. I knew that if Matt accepted my invitation, he'd have wonderful insights about these episodes. And I knew our conversation would go in unexpected but really fulfilling directions. Thankfully, he did accept, and we had a blast. One of the things I really like about my conversation with Matt is that sometimes we really disagree on something. So we get to clash, we listen to each other, we express our opinions, our reasoning, and it's great. It's what makes it fun for me and hopefully for you. So let's get started. The first listener selected episode is from season 1, episode 12, The Strange and Wondrous Life of Rick Ankiel. In this episode, I discuss the outlier that is Rick Ankiel, who came up as a pitching phenom, then self-destructed in a playoff game during his first season, and failed in his comeback effort, until he decided to change the script and start over as a position player, which you almost never see. But he did it. He succeeded. He came back and played for years as an outfielder in Major League Baseball. But there's so much more to the story. So for Rick Ankiel, so this episode about this amazing story and talk about rarities. This guy who did something that you might think other players would do more frequently,
Yeah.
but it's definitely rare and you don't see it happening. And I think that speaks to, whatever you want to say, the qualities that allowed him to start off as a phenom pitcher and then fail at that, have a breakdown, and then come back as a fairly successful hitter. And that caught my eye immediately, and I wanted to tell this story. And there's the whole emotional, the backstory, childhood trauma, and all that comes into it that I think a lot of people could relate to when they're hearing this story. So, for you, like what comes up for you when you think about this?
What comes up for me when I think about this episode is the extraordinary alchemy that Ankiel somehow is was a has been able and was able to summon. And what I mean by that is, I think that the personal biography of how he emerged from that household in the first place with a determination and a grit and a resilience is the story. Because how many times do we hear about people who go through what he went through as a child and that damage and again, again, again in their lives, and sometimes, unfortunately, becomes a part of that level of the family tree that then might become available to pass on to the next generation and then to the next generation. Because so much of abuse, once it happens in a family, can stay in a family tree as it's moved from generation to generation. But Ankiel presents this remarkable story of someone who emerges from all of this with a path to recovery, and to not just recovery but to excellence.
Yeah.
And so to see someone go through what he went through and melt down on the biggest possible stage at a critical point in his career, echoing the nightmare scenarios that, by the way, a lot of professional football coaches have when it comes to their young quarterbacks.
Hmm.
And there's so much concern about protecting the psyches of these young players as they're adjusting to a whole new level of competition. And there he is, Ankiel, in the playoffs, and just loses it. And that's for most stories I think we would ever hear about something like this, that would be the end of it. And it would have been the very sad conclusion to an otherwise very promising career. And we would wonder the way we would wonder about guys like Mark Fidrich, who was, rookie of the year in 1976, I think, for the Detroit Tigers, had an arm injury, and after two or maybe one and a half spectacular seasons, was never able to recover and died in a farming accident. And so we just, that's the kind of outcome that we usually associate with guys like him. But he was
Yeah.
able to recover.
And going to that meltdown against the Braves,
It was the Braves, yeah.
you like one thing that's hard for people to do is put themselves in the place of Ankiel or any pitcher in a high stakes moment. It's just, if you haven't been there, and I can't do it, right? It's like you're pitching in a high stakes baseball game in front of, 30, 40,000 people. Like you're just out there and you look around and there are all these people with these expectations about you. It's like how can you put yourself in that place to understand? It's really difficult. So I think it's like maybe if you think about the time in your life when you were talking to a lot of people, public speaking is a terror for so many people. Like that time where you were out, you had the spotlight on you. How did you feel? And just multiply that by 1,000 when you're talking about an athlete. And that in itself is enough. But then you have basically a rookie. And one of the things that I started my episode with was a quote from uh, Tony La Russa. Tony La Russa, in retrospect, said that starting Ankiel was, quote, a decision that perhaps haunts him more than any other he has ever made. I mean, that's from a reporter, but it's like that tells you how high the stakes were and putting somebody in this position. And then, what you're talking about, all of this trauma, all this baggage that is in there. And people might say, well, he dealt with it so far. What was it about this day? But it's you it's hard to say exactly how much is going on inside that tips the scales. But, something because he pitched two really good innings and which is more baffling, right? In that playoff game against the Braves, and Keel pitched two very really good innings, and then just had a pitch that got away from him, and that was it. So, it's trying to put the listener, anybody following this story in the place, like, wow, what must that have been like? And going back to what you said, how that would have been the end. That would have been, the final period on the story for this guy. Like, okay, he's gone. Like he's gonna disappear, but that didn't happen. And so that was incredible. It's like part of this story what makes it so amazing. There are so many individual components, like chapters that in themselves are astounding. It's like, let me tell you a story about this guy, but you can just keep putting them together, which makes it remarkable.
It really does. And there are lessons in his story for all of us because we all of us as we move through life are going to get knocked around. It's inevitable. It's a part of the human experience. And so much of our ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other requires drawing on first a reservoir that lives within ourselves, but then also the support and love of other people around us. And here's a guy who, in his very critical early years, seems to have lacked a lot of the structures and the support that build resilience in people, or at least we like to think build resilience in people, and he was deprived of those things. And
Yes.
so I just would love to be able to get inside his brain and understand what is it about his circumstances that allowed him to be so resilient despite having not had the kind of support structures that so many other kids do. And whatever it is that he has, I hope one day he writes it down if he hasn't already, because there are lessons in his experience that all of us can draw upon.
Yeah. And another part as you're talking, I'm thinking, what is it that was happening for him on a day-to-day basis that we didn't see, you know?
Right.
Because it's like one of these storylines that comes through is, okay, you're persevering, you're pushing through. Like how could you do that? But also, what is the cost of that? Because your body is traumatized from your trauma, from your father, from your upbringing, from all that you saw. He has some graphic stories in his uh, interviews and autobiography about things that happened to him that he witnessed as a child with his father and mother, just his father in his baseball life. It's like you think of the stereotypical father at the fence, shouting and multiply that by 100, and that was his dad. And what is he dealing with? How much pressure, how much stress, how tight is his body 24 hours a day because of that? Like these are the things that he may not even be aware of because he's pushing through and it's amazing, but also what's the cost of not really allowing his body to recover, to
Mm.
really understand where he is now? When I was reviewing this episode, I was thinking, well, what did I miss that I could have included the first time through? And part of it was, his autobiography. It's like, oh, that feels like I could have, because I was reading it, but I didn't include that in the episode. I took my sources from other places. But as I was going through his Enkil's autobiography, it was interesting because he says early on how he didn't know at the time why he couldn't suddenly pitch, and he still doesn't know why. So
Mm.
he's writing that, 10 or more years later. He's saying something
Mm.
happened to me that day, and I still don't know why. And to me, that's baffling because 2 pages later, he says, my career was falling apart. My team couldn't rely on me. I hadn't slept in days. My father was in jail and calling me at all hours, pulling me under. My mother was doing this. So he's basically listing all of these triggers that are going on while he's stepping up to the mound in this high pressure game. And he can't see it. And that's amazing, right? Even in reflection, even with someone was helping him write this book, he still couldn't see these triggers that were causing all of these problems that really cracked him in half at that game. And so, like, wow. So, how important is it to be able to reflect and slow down and understand your triggers, understand the things that are causing problems inside of you? And that really surprised me.
Was that the part of the story that stood out the most to you? Or do you find in your listening to it and sitting with the story, do you find that there is something else that maybe like in 10 years time when you've put this episode away for a bit and someone says, hey Ben, remember what you know that really terrific episode you put together on Ankiel? Like, what do you think is going to be the one thing that comes back to you?
I think it is I think it is this overarching theme of um, neglect.
Mm,
Because I was also a little surprised that I was including myself in that episode. Like I went back, it's like, oh, I talk about myself and my dad and baseball, and I only do that in a few episodes of Midnight Library. And for other people to hear, this is a major, I would say, calling for me in doing this show and helping people see, just like Rick Ankiel couldn't see. And when you hear these stories, you see, wait, oh man, that sounds like my story. It's like, oh wow, that really sounds like uh what happened to me. I didn't see it that way. And so I think that stands out here when you look at this unique example with Rick Ankiel, and at the same time, it's universal in terms of, okay, there was so much neglect, there was so much suffering that came, but also he was able to find comfort. He was able to find nourishment in people who were supporting him, and he was able to see that, and that really comes through for me. It's like when you can really connect and update your system and find people who support you, and hopefully that's you as well, like you can support yourself. um like that's what life is about, and I hope people see that in this episode, and it really leads to recognition and more kindness towards themselves, and seeking out those relationships that are nourishing and not toxic.
I think people will see it that way. And there there have always been opportunities in the stories of professional athletes and sports to create meaningful connections between fans and the men and women in the arena. And but most of the time those connections are around the heroic, the superlative outcome, the triumph in the face of adversity purely in an athletic sense. Very rarely do we get exposed to the sorts of vulnerabilities that come up, not only, by the way, in the Ankiel episode, but I think in lots of episodes where your storytelling brings us face to face with the humanity of the people involved in the stories. And it's more than just their faces on a baseball card or their pictures online or video highlights from decades ago. These are real men, and their stories are messy oftentimes.
Hmm.
And sometimes in the messiness, where fans can also create a meaningful connection and find something to draw upon. And I think that's what I'll take from this and other episodes too, I think, is a sense of optimism
Hmm.
that if Ankiel can get through this challenge in his life, what might I be able to do? Is
Yeah,
that reservoir of resilience in all of us and just needs to be found and unlocked in some way?
yeah, yeah. And like as you're talking, I see a movie version of his story, and just like Field of Dreams, where Phil Alden Robinson, the director, really builds up the film without you seeing it to this moment of catch at the end. It's like I see this film of Enkiel building up to this moment where he comes back finally to the Cardinals organization who supported him. He worked his way back up, and he steps up to the plate for his first time as a hitter, right? And he strikes out, and the crowd is just cheering him on, and just like building that up, that glow, like how beautiful. This crowd is like, we love you. It's like, you're back, you work so hard, you struck out, so what?
Right.
And
Yeah.
just like he's wrapped, he's enveloped in this love, and then the next time up he hits a home run, right? It's amazing.
And it's a, and again another lesson that people will recognize in others the struggle. And so you had however many tens of thousands at Busch Stadium
Yeah.
recognizing, at least at a headline level, what Ankiel had endured to
Hmm.
climb all the way back. And they could never have appreciated the emotional struggle, how hard it must have been to go back all the way to the lowest level of single A ball and prove himself all over again and riding the buses and staying at the cheap motels and having the lousy per diems and all of the things that go with playing minor league ball and having to show your face to coaches that you thought you wouldn't see again except maybe like at special occasions with the franchise, and to
Yeah.
go through all of that and come all the way back, and for the fans to be able to shorthand all of that and go, this guy has endured a lot, he's made it all the way back, who cares if he strikes out? Like the fact that he's wielding a bat and they put him in the lineup, that's a win, and they
Yeah.
were cheering for him, and that it
Yeah.
was just, how can you not feel great about it?
Yeah. I mean, even and the details, just the one thing that you said there, like that I never even thought about, which is hugely impacting. It's like like to go back where you thought I was done with this, I was out of here. Wow. And you have to face those people, those coaches again. How humbling. Yeah, absolutely. Like that's a great detail to to mention, to really put that into the minds of listeners. Like, wow. Like, and that's universal too. If you have to go back in some kind of capacity, whether it's work or some other area of your life, right? You're moving forward and you have to go backwards, and how hard that is.
That's right. And we all have moments like this, we all do, where
Yeah.
we stumble. It's very easy, I think, for me to imagine that professionally, where I've taken jobs that didn't work out, and so after taking a job and feeling really good about it, realizing this wasn't the right move, and stepping back and starting over again.
Yeah.
But then also seeing the opportunity in that, and learning to cast that not as a failure, but just as learning,
Yeah.
you know, uh and so I found myself uplifted by everything that he's gone through, and I hope one day to see a movie version of it, because you're exactly right, it has a very cinematic element to it.
It does. They made a movie, The Phenom, with Paul Giamatti and
Oh,
was it
right.
Ethan Hawke, I think was the father. And they didn't say it was related, but it basically was the story of Rick Ankiel. Um, but maybe an actual story on him
Yeah,
would be cool.
truth might
Yeah.
be better than fiction in this case.
Yeah. Next on the list, chosen by listeners, is episode 4 of season 2, The Making of Field of Dreams. Which is funny in a way because this to me is the biggest outlier of the episodes of season 2. For a quick summary, the episode is about a fictional character in a novel with a syndrome of lying about being a professional baseball player that turned into two real life scholars researching the same phenomenon and uncovering shocking findings. Let's pick up where Matt and I left off.
Maybe do you want to give like the recap of it? There's so many places I want to start to dig into
Yeah,
this.
yeah, sure. So Field of Dreams was based on the book Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella, and certain parts of the book did not make it into the film, including this character, Eddie Sissons. And Eddie Sissons was this old man who talked and talked about playing for the Cubs, the famous Cubs of the 1910s. And like that's what he would do. And just like Doc Graham, Sissons was able to go back as a young player, but soon it was revealed that he had never actually played for the Cubs. And so now here's this guy who, a big part of his identity is saying he was a big league ball player, and that was all a lie. And it came out in this novel, and this is W.P. Kinsella's creation. But then W.P. Kinsella takes this character in this story of the Eddie Sissons, and he writes a short story a few years later about Eddie Sissons syndrome, about this epidemic of uh, men who lie about playing Major League Baseball or professional baseball. And in the story, these two scholars, they do a research study and they go around and try to find these men. But then sometime after that, in real life, these two actual scholars, Dick Crepeau, who's a historian, sports historian, and Rob Schenkoff, they do their own research and they make an incredible discovery. They talk to Cooperstown, and researchers at Cooperstown say that in their history, based on their experience, 1 in 5 men who claim to be professional baseball players are lying. Right. So it's this huge, I mean, I guess you could say scandal, but a recognition of what's going on. And so, that's really the basis of this. But there is an update I can talk about. But that's the episode, and that's what happened.
I was astounded by this. And it we'll talk a little bit later about the Black Sox scandal as we revisit that three-parter in a later season. But there is a common thread here, an element of truthfulness and integrity that emerges in both of these episodes, or both of the three-parter of the Black Sox and the Eddie Sissons episode. And I I cannot imagine creating a fiction like this and then foisting it on other people and then knowing that every time that subject would come up, I might then therefore have to not only tell the lie again, but also perpetuate it or build upon it. And someone might say, so tell them, and thinking back to the Eddie Sissons character. So did you play with Cap Anson? Did you play with three figure Mordecai Brown? Like these, which would require him then to uh, not only tell the lie again, but to expand it. And I cannot understand. And I was going to ask you, as someone who has spent more time in the subject matter material, something that I find unanswerable and what drew me to revisit this episode with you, which is what do you suppose it is that makes certain people claim an affiliation with something that is very obviously designed to, augment their standing in some way among
Yeah.
family or friends? And you cited in the episode people who have falsely claimed military experience through the years. And what is it that drives people to create that kind of a fiction and then relive it again and again and again to perpetuate it?
Yeah, and to dig a hole so deep, right? Because to keep track of all that, it must be exhausting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like, okay, now I told this to this other person, I let this slip out. Now I have to work that into the story if I ever talk to him again. And then he talks to this other person and now they know it. I mean, like it's so draining just to even think about it for 10 seconds. So what, right, what must that be? And like there's one end of this, which is, and like if we're talking about parts of the story that I didn't really elaborate on or touched on, it was, one of the real life investigators here is Rob Schenkoff. And what stood out to me in really listening to this again and at the time was how angry Rob was at these people. Like you can hear the
Yes, you
anger in
can.
his voice. Here's a clip from the episode of Rob Scheinkoff telling the story of confronting a chiropractor who pretended to be a Yankee to boost his business.
And so I go in there, I said, I need 10 minutes of your time. And he said, well, the clock is ticking. I said, where do you get off passing yourself off as a former New York Yankee? And he holds out his hand. He's wearing a World Series ring. And he said, there you go. And I said, well, I don't care if you're wearing jewelry. You didn't play for the Yankees. I did my due diligence before I went there. And he got up and he said, I have nothing more to say. I said, no, you have plenty to say. You've been lying.
Part of it is like one of these guys that did this, that he and Dick Crepeau investigated, like he would go around like to ball games throughout the ceremonial first pitch and pretending to be affiliated with these organizations, and the betrayal. It's so deep. And so on this side, I can see that for fans, because it's when you're talking to an ex-ball player, especially an ex-major leaguer, for many people, it's sacred. It's hallowed ground, whatever they're saying. You are in the presence of someone who went through this, who played at the highest level, and then to be betrayed. I can understand Rob's anger, but from the other side, like to your question, what would drive someone to do this? To me, it's Eddie Sisson syndrome is a symptom of just deep neglect, because somewhere along the line, probably as a child, you didn't get attention, right? You were not seen, you were not heard. And that's so deep. That craving is so deep that you will do anything to get that attention. You will do anything for someone to really see you, even if it's lying, right? Because now someone is looking at you, someone is listening to you, they're paying attention to you. And that matters more than anything. And so it doesn't matter if you're lying, it doesn't matter if eventually you're found out, because it's like in those moments, you get to bask in that glow of being recognized. And that's so deep. That's what all of us want: to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized. And, I think of this idea of being remembered, and some people would like to be remembered even if it's for terrible things, because that urge to be seen is so deep. They don't care, right? Because they don't want to be invisible. So I think that really strikes at the heart of this. Men who, I mean, it's anybody, men, women, anyone. You didn't get that attention. You were not loved. You were neglected, and so you feel like you have to make up for that. So I think that's really at the heart of this, and it's really sad. We look at this, we might get angry at men for lying, for making up these stories, for dragging their families to Cooperstown and saying, like, that's how deep some of these lies were, right? And then the researcher has to tell them and tell the family. And a lot of the families would come after the man was dead, and they would find out that no, he never played. And so, like, to me, it's really sad, and it speaks to, even today, I think, we're starting to change things, but it's a problem, and these are some of the consequences of neglect, of not being loved unconditionally, and really being seen.
I had a childhood friend I made at a summer camp one year. That's probably when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I remember this little boy convincing me that in his home garage, he had essentially, I can't believe I'm saying this, he had essentially built a lightsaber from Star Wars from scratch. And that he had come across the right sort of chemicals and things, and that if you did XYZ together, like anyone could do it. And I remember being at first incredulous, but then he seemed so convincing that I thought he had done it. He had done it, and he had built this weapon in his garage. And I think I must have come home from camp one day convinced of the truthfulness of this story, and told my mom, "You'd never believe what I heard today. It is possible to build a lightsaber at home." And of course, it didn't take long for my parents to completely deconstruct the idea. And but I remember thinking not so much that, oh, this kid must be starved for attention at home, because that would not have occurred to me as a
Sure.
as a little guy. But
Yeah.
I do remember thinking, that and recognizing that he loved the attention of it. He could see I was a rapt audience, that I had bought it
Yeah.
and was just loving it. And so I associate this with a very childlike driven need for attention, and for not only just any kind of attention, but an attention that's laced with awe, to
Yeah.
say, this is amazing. Like, oh my gosh, how good for you that you've done this thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 And like for a kid, it's like something inside is picking up on that, right? And it's like I
Yeah,
want more of that. Like that
of course.
dopamine hit, whatever it's generating inside, that someone is looking at you in that way. And
I've
just
got status.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Totally.
being seen. Yeah. So I mean um that really stands out about this episode. I think it goes to this deep problem in our society.
I'll tell you one element that stood out to me, that I found to be so gracious in all of this. The work that Hall of Fame does when they receive these inquiries from these family members and then have to write the letter no one at the Hall of Fame wants to have to write, which is to say, we have been thorough in our assessment of the claim, and we can find no record of so and so having ever played in a Major League Baseball game. And I can't remember the specifics, Ben, but there was something in the letters that they write that offers some grace, to say, we mean no ill will towards the memory of your loved one.
Yeah,
And I just I my heart goes out to the people at the Hall of Fame who have to write the we're sorry letters,
yeah,
and just how in the end it's a total stranger who reveals the truth with no connection at all to the family. They are suddenly thrust one day into the role of having to peel back the curtain and shine a light into what might have been generations upon generations of a lie,
yeah.
and how hard that is to do, and to do it the way that they do it, which was with such grace and generosity. It made me love the Hall of Fame even more than I already do. I'll say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's very delicate. And you're talking about the letter, right? They also had to do this in person over and over again, which is even more difficult,
Ooh,
right?
yeah.
Right. You're standing there talking to a wife, talking to little children who may have heard for years how their father was a major league ball player, right? And now you have to break the news to them. Like that's devastating.
It would just be awful. Yeah, you're expecting to roll up and maybe get like shown the side entrance because you're related to a ball player,
Yeah.
and throwing on the white gloves, which, by the way, I have done. I've done the archival tour at the Baseball Hall of Fame, where you do put on the white gloves and
Oh yeah.
you go backstage. Have you done that too?
No, no.
Oh, I hope you get a chance to do it someday.
Yeah.
Bring some friends and some loved ones, and you can sign up for that. That's an available level of a tour, and you go into cold storage and get to handle some like truly epic Olympian sort of levels of artifacts that the game has produced over the years:
Yeah.
jerseys and balls and bats and ticket stubs, and uh,
Yeah.
the contract that was written on the back of written on hotel stationery that signed Bob Feller as a 16 or 17-year old. I mean, these sorts of things. But anyway, you
Yeah.
expect to show up and have these kinds of experiences there because of this connection you believe you have, and then to come to find out that no, you're just as eligible for general admission as everybody else here is. That's got to be really tough.
Yeah. And I would imagine it's not happening as much anymore, because, a lot of what was Eddie Sisson syndrome occurred when you could lie. You didn't have the internet
Right.
to check on that in 5 seconds. Even though in the episode, I remember Dick and Rob saying that, even with search engines, people were still lying. It's like once you do it, it's pathological and you can't stop. But I would imagine for the Hall of Fame that those instances have significantly decreased.
I would imagine so. It's so easy now to anyone. with a phone can instantly fact check this stuff. So I suspect you're right, and I hope it's right. I hope that that's right. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a fascinating episode, and I'm glad for guys like Rob Shankoff who are out on a mission, have been on a mission to expose this stuff, because I do find that at the end of the day, one of the things that happens with these people who tell these mistruths is that they are cheapening the the true achievement that those
Sure.
who have even had one at bat in the major
Yeah.
leagues have achieved to get there.
Yeah. Well, as a follow-up, I don't know, can you
Pull it back a little bit. I
does it
can't
come
see
in?
it. I must be a bunch of faces on it because I can't see it. There
Okay.
it is. Baseball imposters. Oh
Yeah.
boy. Okay.
So Rob wrote this book. So it's an entire book on these cases, these instances, baseball imposters, the dark side of fandom, and it just came out this year. So he's still into it. He's still doing it. Um, and he's talked at Cooperstown. He goes around and does talks about this and really keeping the conversation alive. But I mean, when you have a story like this, it's like how can you not keep talking about it?
It's fascinating, and again, it taps into the psyche in ways that get us asking not just about the baseball questions, but about the bigger life questions. That what is it in certain people that makes them craft a totally alternate, bizarro biography, and
Yeah,
then present that biography as truth to others?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like just exploring those questions. You don't need an answer, but it's fun to try to look into it. And it's like this also to me speaks of the richness of Shoeless Joe, the book, right? Because like, wow, this was in there and it didn't make the movie, right? There's so much in there, and to look at. There's so many interesting aspects of the book that are different from the film, which are just as interesting.
Are there any angles then upon after listening to this episode, are there any angles or questions that you maybe left on the editing room floor, or that you wish you could reintroduce if you had another 15 minutes that you could add on to this? Is there
Well, I
anything
think
else you'd like to do?
I think what I talked about of exploring Rob's personal story and his relationship to this a little more. And I would have loved to have talked to WP Kinsella to get into his head, but he was no longer alive. Um, but no, I mean, I was really happy with this and how it came together and who I was able to talk to and like the some of the best stories are when I set up interviews and then I just from the interview something else pops out and I feel like that happened here like talking to Tim Wiles from the Hall of Fame and just getting these additional stories.
Well, I mentioned to you in our exchange building up to this, Ben, that this is the episode that I reference more often than any other episode in the entire library, entire library, Midnight Library of Baseball. I mentioned this one because it to me, it brings together so many different elements that don't require being a baseball fan to really appreciate
Yeah,
the strangeness and the richness of the story.
yeah, yeah. And that's what I like. I like to hear about that too, and like to have like a better idea of what is coming together. And I think for this one, it's just like it's that what, right? It's like what that happened, right?
Right,
Those are
exactly.
the best stories.
That's exactly right.
That's all for tonight. Matt and I will pick up next week with three more fan favorites. Good night.